everybody, welcome back to Wanna Play. My name is James McKenna, and today I'm going to be starting a new series. I hope this series is received well because I have a lot of plans for it in the future, but this series is going to be basically explaining to you why certain horror movies are the best horror movies or the most influential, or just why they are so good. And the first one that I'm going to tackle today is The Shining. So many of you may know The Shining is my favorite movie of all time, and there are many reasons for that. I haven't gone really in depth on why I really like The Shining so much in a video, so I'm starting off this series with The Shining, and I'm going to do The Last House on the Left next, so you don't really need to request anything to be next, because Last House is going to be next after The Shining. But yeah, let's get into why The Shining is the best horror movie ever made. The characters. The characters in The Shining are possibly the best characters in all of horror. That's because of their writing and because of their acting. Jack Nicholson portrays Jack Torrance in this film, who is possibly the best horror antagonist of all time because of just the subliminal moments in the film, the moments that really don't have that much focus built around it, but you definitely can notice. One example of this is when Danny, Wendy, and Jack are driving up to the hotel for the first time, and Jack has this stone-cold look of almost boredom and anger on his face, but as soon as Danny brings up the Donner Party topic and all about the cannibalism, Jack gets a huge smile plastered across his face, and he begins to explain to Danny all about the Donner Party and the cannibalism up in the mountains. Then there's Danny, who is possibly the most capable kid character in all of horror. He has these crazy flashes of visions that are going to take place in the future and just impending doom, and I love his facial acting in this film. Probably the best facial acting for any kid in horror. I love what Kubrick had him do for this film, and he is amazing. He's another one that slowly begins to turn throughout the film. Like, you see signs of weirdness throughout his character in the beginning of the film, and in the middle of the film, when he's talking to the chef Dick Halloran, he begins to explain what Tony is. And you can just tell that this kid is a little bit messed up. It's not blatant 100% like this kid is creepy and messed up, but it hints throughout the film all the way up till the ending where he outsmarts his father in the maze. Then there's the mother, Wendy, who of the main three characters I'd say is probably the weakest, but she is still a very emotionally stunned character who does probably change the most throughout the film. In the beginning, she's a loving mother, she's a loving wife, and she would do anything to protect the name of her son and her husband, but once again, as the film progresses, she gets more and more insane up until she sees the bear in the door, and then she's completely insane, just like Jack and Danny. She's seeing all of this stuff now for the first time, and I think that is such a good way for you to introduce Wendy's character going insane. Wendy is a great character, Jack is a great character, and Danny is a great character, but also I have to mention Delbert Grady because his acting is so perfect. He might be the best acted side character in The Shining, and I love how his character just goes back and forth from the hotel caretaker to Delbert Grady again, because it starts off with Jack saying, "Wait a minute, you were the caretaker, you slaughtered your wife and daughter with an axe and then blew your brains out." And Delbert Grady says, "I have no recollection of that at all." And Jack Nicholson looks at him confused. And then he asks him again, and then Delbert Grady basically confesses without confessing, just saying, "I corrected them." That right there is very creepy, and Delbert Grady might just be the creepiest ghost in The Shining. The direction. I actually do believe that this is the best directed horror movie of all time because of just how Stanley Kubrick would intentionally move things around in between shots. Some people might see it as continuity errors, but I don't believe so at all because I think it actually works to give you some unsettling moments throughout the film. One of my favorite examples of this is when Wendy and Jack are arguing at first, and Jack is telling Wendy, "Whenever I'm in here, whenever I'm working, and then whenever you come in, you're distracting me, breaking my concentration." There's a shot behind Jack in the background that shows a chair and a desk, and then it cuts to Wendy, but then it cuts back and the chair and the desk are missing. And Stanley Kubrick, what he did is he would just cut the camera and he'd just move him out of the frame, and then you just leave it in, and you wouldn't notice it at first, you wouldn't notice it the second time or the third time, and eventually you start to pick up more and more. One of the most famous examples of this as well is the window at the beginning of the movie. When Jack is going to give his interview to become the caretaker of the hotel, he walks into Ullman's office where there's a window. However, in the shot before, Jack was walking to his office where we saw that there's a hallway where that window is supposed to be. It's very subliminal, and it is some of the best direction of all time. And yes, I know that Stanley Kubrick would basically end up torturing Shelley Duvall through the role, but Shelley Duvall herself has admitted that it did make for a better performance in her, and The Shining just has possibly the best direction in all of horror, which is another reason why I think this is the best. The set. The main set in The Shining is possibly the greatest set in all of horror. Once again, Stanley Kubrick designed this movie intentionally for it to make no spatial sense. It's not blatant, it's not obvious. The only way you would realize is if you're going to build the Overlook Hotel out of Lego or in a video game or something along those lines, where you start to realize that there are rooms where rooms shouldn't be, windows where windows shouldn't be, there are rooms that overlap each other, hallways that don't lead into the next hallway that the character is walking in, and also Kubrick would use these weird color patterns for all of his carpet designs, all of his window blinds designs, and it just adds to the unsettling nature of The Shining. The set of the Overlook Hotel is so well made where it feels super packed in, super claustrophobic, but also super huge to the point where you're never gonna explore the entire hotel, even if you were up there as long as Jack, Wendy, and Danny are gonna be to take care of it over the winter. The acting. Of course, you can't talk about The Shining without mentioning the acting. I've already mentioned Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall and Danny Lloyd's portrayal of their characters, but I must go into some of the minor characters too. I don't think there is any bad acting at all whatsoever from any character in this entire film, which is another reason why it's just such a well-made film, because everybody was so dedicated emotionally, physically, mentally to their roles that this movie ended up being incredible. Two big shoutouts that I want to give are to Scatman Crothers, who played Dick Halloran, the chef, and to Joe Turkel, who played Lloyd, the bartender. Scatman Crothers has the perfect soft-spoken and calm voice to talk to Danny and make him feel a little bit unsettled, and to make him feel on edge, and to also convince him, or at least try to convince him, to not do things such as go into room 237. And I think it makes his death all the more emotional once it comes at the hands of Jack Torrance. And also, Joe Turkel plays Lloyd the bartender so well in such a creepy and unsettling manner. With his creepy smile and his creepy eyes, he reminds me a lot about Hannibal Lecter and Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of him. You rarely see him blink, and that makes it even the more unsettling. He talks to Jack like an old friend, but he also talks to him in a very creepy manner. It could be helped by the Gold Room setting, how there is no other people in this giant room, but he just talks so creepily, and he stands behind the bar the entire time. He doesn't do anything other than that, but he is one of the creepiest and most well-acted characters in this entire movie because of the dedication that Joe Turkel brought to the role. The foreshadowing. I included this category almost because I wanted to tell you about one of my theories for The Shining, and that all starts in the very beginning of the film where Danny Torrance foreshadows to only a couple seconds in the future. He's talking to Tony in the bathroom, his imaginary friend, and he asks Tony if Jack Torrance, his father, got the job, and Tony responds by saying he already did. He's gonna phone up Wendy in a few minutes to tell her. And a couple seconds later, the phone goes off. So that instantly tells you that Danny Torrance is a little bit messed up, and he is a little bit weird, and there's something going on because he did just predict the future. But right after that scene where he starts to see visions of the blood elevator and the twin girls, then you know something is even more unsettling and even more up, although you don't know entirely. And then it all starts to go down because of all of this foreshadowing in the beginning, and you see all of those scenes that Danny was thinking of and thinking of throughout the movie extended, whether it's the little girls in the hallway or the blood elevator that Wendy sees, or my favorite and possibly my favorite theory about The Shining, because I think that it could be real, is that I believe that there are no ghosts in The Shining at all whatsoever, because think of it this way. Whenever Jack Torrance sees one of the ghosts, there's always a mirror somewhere in the room or a reflective purpose that he can see himself in. Whether it's the mirror in room 237 or the mirror in the bar behind Grady or the mirror in the bathroom behind Grady, it's always a mirror and there's always one behind him. Another instance that adds to this is whenever Jack's walking down to the gold room, he's always walking, but whenever he hits a mirror, whenever he goes by a mirror in the hallway, he does this little freak out dance and then he continues to walk normally after he walks by it. This theory all leads up to when Jack is locked in the pantry and Delbert Grady knocks on the door and says that basically if Jack kills his family, he'll let him out. But then he does let him out. Now this door is reflective, so what I think the theory is, what I think really happened is that Danny actually did indeed let him out of the pantry, because since we established in the beginning that Danny can see into the future, I believe that Danny saw somehow that if he let Jack out of the pantry, then he would be able to track him through the maze and make him freeze to death, which is why he did it. We get that whole maze chase, which I assume was mapped out by Tony in Danny's head, and that's how Jack Torrance ultimately ends up dying in the end, because he's outsmarted by Danny and presumably Tony along by his side. Our final point is the eeriness of the film. This film doesn't really have a score. There isn't too much music in it at all. It's just weird, strange, ambient noise. There's noise that just starts at a low pitch and it starts to get higher and higher and higher. And then there are noises where it's one noise repeated over and over and over. And it's just very creepy, and it makes for some very eerie moments in the film. There's so many eerie parts to the set designs. As I've stated, there are the carpet patterns that don't really match up and meet the eye too well. There are giant windows that just lead to outside. The model of the maze when Jack is looking over it is much, much bigger than the actual maze and the actual maze model. There's just so many eerie moments to this film because of the score and because of the characters slowly starting to lose their minds. I don't think there's any scary moments in this film. I think it's all eerie and creepy. And whenever you do see the monsters, they always disappear, which is another reason why I do think that none of them are real, because they always end up disappearing after the character closes their eyes. So this movie is just so eerie. It could feel cliche to some people, I can see that, but The Shining pulls it off in such a manner that it negates the cliches and does its own thing. The Shining is an absolute masterpiece, and I hope I've been able to convince you why.